Hello, everyone. This is Annanesterova, and welcome to my podcast. Today, my guest is Brian Witlin, a serial entrepreneur, a business owner, and a design expert who will share his story and his adventures in business and art with me today. I'm really happy to have you here, Brian. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Anna.
I just wanted to jump in right away and to ask you to tell me what do you do now? Where are you at? And how you got to a point where you and we're working at the moment?
So right now I lead product development. I'm the VP of product at a company called PAX Labs. It's also known as PAX or PAX Labs. And PAX is one of the pioneers in the cannabis hardware space. And we've shifted over the last year from just being a hardware company to doing a lot more research and development in consumables, and we're actually working on some new products that are kind of peer reviewed for specific conditions or specific things that people experience, like issues with sleep is one of the things that we're working on, and focus, etc. So it's a really interesting new kind of frontier for me, as well as we're trying to push the boundaries for the company as well. I got here. It's kind of serendipitously. I've been primarily in consumer health and software, and but as I transitioned out of my last role, one of my friends, who's the founder of this company, or I have two good friends who are the founders of this company, had suggested, even though I didn't have any experience in this whole entire world, to explore and look at this opportunity as a vice president of product, and it's been a really fun ride so far in a little bit less than a year.
Yeah. I think it's fair to share with the audience that where you're located. So you are in the Bay Area, and you've been there for quite some time now. So how about we start with a little bit of how it all started? Can you tell me, where did you grow up and how you ended up in the Bay Area and how long you've been there for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Chicago and lived in the suburbs of Chicago. So where I grew up was an area that I would say people had a lot more conventional, the parents would have more conventional jobs, or they would be in trading, there would be an accountant. My dad was in business consulting or management consulting. So I didn't have a lot of exposure to people who were entrepreneurs. I, throughout my life, without really knowing I was doing entrepreneurship, I was starting businesses, clubs, creating products, building things in my backyard, with no real direction or understanding as to why I was doing it. People would call them schemes. So one example of a scheme, one of my friends and I, who later became business partners, figured out that if you go, this is back in the day when Ticketmaster.com first launched, we could actually predict what a page would look like on that website for a event at a specific venue before it was to launch. We were able to see in the code, even though we didn't know how to code, that there were these hidden variables, which allowed us to, we figured out if we could replicate a page that didn't exist yet for a show that was coming up, that we could order tickets faster than other people. This is before all the new safeguards. And so we would order tickets and sell them on eBay. We found some other schemes to work on, but eventually, we had several of these small businesses going on, and started our first software company while we were in college together. And so we started a software company after doing these things and sold that company. And my same friend, business partner, showed me this video, which was the most popular Nightline special. I think it still is probably the most popular Nightline special to date, was on a company called IDEO, which was based in the San Francisco Bay Area and happens to be the world leader in terms of the companies, in terms of number of design awards won. So it's a small consultancy. And in the video, they showed a process using something called user-centered design, where they redesigned something really mundane like the shopping cart in 5 days. And we walked everyone through that process. And to me, I thought, wow, this is a really neat combination of the things I really enjoy. I really love being an entrepreneur, but I really like actually building products and building things for people. So it was, there was unfortunately the only way to study this program. There's only 2 programs in the world that offered it. One was at Stanford University, which is notoriously difficult to get into. And the other one was in Europe, and it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So after attempting a few times to get into Stanford, 3 times, and essentially getting an equivalent undergraduate degree in art and mechanical engineering after doing a full undergraduate in business, I got in, studied that, and since then have taken the learnings from the Stanford program and have applied it to multiple startups that I've been involved with.
That's an incredible story. And actually, the part of the mission of my podcast is to inspire people and share real life examples of people who actually either change their career path or stay determined to what they're trying to do. So I think your story proves that if you want something hard enough, you can totally work towards it and get it done. Because like you said, you never stopped after the first attempt, the second attempt. You're like, no, only 2 programs in the world. I'll get into one of them. So, and you did, which is great. And look where you're at. You actually, one of the things that you do, you also a lecturer in Stanford. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, how you got into it? So you not only graduated from Stanford, but you also got involved with the educational component too.
Yeah, to me, while I was a student, I was a graduate student at Stanford, was a teacher's assistant for programs in what at the time was a new institute at Stanford called the D School, or the Design Institute. I was in a design program, which was a joint program between mechanical engineering and art. But this new institute was for the entire university. The idea was to bring together cross-functionally project teams to be able to solve challenging problems, but by bringing together multiple vantage points and applying this design thinking methodology. And to me, that was really exciting. So I actually got to help shape the design of the actual school physically. We actually moved to 4 different facilities in 4 years. So actually was part of the, a small part, but participated in the thinking like, what is the ideal space for innovation? What does that look like from, what do the chairs look like? How do we create space that could be subdivided for different purposes? And it's amazing when you start to think about a space like that, and then you think about how people can interact, and then the people in there, it's actually really energizing. And so over the years, I've participated and have come back for various lecture type roles. And then my plan is eventually to do it more full time as I get later in my career, because it's just an amazing way to give back and also to be able to learn and have energy from the students too. It's amazing to see how these student teams, a lot of actually projects from some of the classes that I've been involved with, they actually turn into successful companies. They start as an idea in a class. There's a class called Launchpad where I was a judge for the final presentations. Some of those were companies acquired by major corporations after a few years of work after this program. So it's a lot of fun, and I like being involved in that.
Yeah. I actually have a couple of questions about the acquisition part of business, which I will ask later on, because that's something I really want to get your opinion on. But before that, I want to also lead to your career becoming a CEO of a company. It was the app company that was acquired by a major player in the field. So the company was called Yumly, and you became a CEO, and you were involved in that company from the very beginning of the start of the project and developed the product to the point of, was it 35 million users?
Yeah.
Overall.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Am I correct? Right. So you developed the product. So you had about 35 million users, and then you went through acquisition. And I do have lots of questions about that part. For example, like how does it feel what are the biggest learning lesson that you got out of the experience of being a CEO of such company? And how does it feel before and after the acquisition? Because it's a very complex project, a complex process. And some people, they're interested in business. They think that lots of stuff are happening very easily, but I know that they're not. And that's what I want to discuss and uncover here. So maybe we'll start from how you got into that position of being a CEO. What was your biggest lesson learned? And then maybe we'll go through acquisition after that.
Yeah, sure. So I, after graduating from Stanford, for my master's thesis, actually created a few different product companies in kind of an incubator format. and had gone through one acquisition. The company Crocs that makes the sandals that people are somehow it's popular again now with the little charms in them. They acquired a footwear accessory business that I co-founded with a friend of mine. So I had gone through that and then had joined IDEO, the design consultancy I had mentioned before, as entrepreneur in residence to help them launch new products and new ideas. So I actually had launched a company called Shopwell as a spin out of IDEO, which essentially was, we were doing machine learning and AI before that was even really known. It was what it was called, and it wasn't a buzzword or anything like that. But essentially the goal was to have a registered dietitian, a medical professional for food, to help people make sense of a typical supermarket may have 40,000 products, to be able to select the best things for their unique health, because there's a lot of confusing claims on packaging, and a lot of people really don't understand that. So I had gone through the full cycle of that. That company was in the process of being acquired. One of the potential acquirers was a company called Yumly, and that company is in the recipe space. And I joined that company to lead product development and help them scale the product onto mobile. The product was very well, there's a lot of traffic going to it. It was at the time, it was something like, for people that are familiar with, there's a travel site called Kayak where you can go on, adjust different sliders for your flights, and you can very easily navigate and get the final results of what you should purchase. And it kind of looks an aggregate across the web at all the different flights. Well, Yumly at the time was doing this for recipes, which was interesting. And it got amazing traffic because there's some really smart growth people who figured out how to get the results from Google to point to Yumly. And so there's a lot of traffic. But if you think about, as a human being, when you think about flights, that's something that's very concrete. For something like food, really people aren't thinking like, oh, well, I need something that's 40% sweet and 70% spicy that has this specific profile. So one of the big insights that we learned when I joined, we did a lot of user-centered research, was that people really wanted to be understood. Typically, when you could hear people when they go into restaurants, they like have to list off all their preferences. It's like a lot of work. Well, so if people are understood, and then you can meet them where they are and make suggestions based upon what we know about the person and other factors, because there's some things that are predictable that are outside the individual, that's actually what people were looking for. And if you boil that down to the simplest thing, it's really answering like, what should I make for dinner? And how do I get it here as quickly as possible? And then the other big insight we had was we decided like, this is something that needs to be extremely visual, because food is something that people are not going to do. You know, they're not going to want to look at like a bunch of text, and that's not how they're going to make a decision about food. So I joined, and the first thing that we worked on was trying to translate this technology from something that was really a search engine into like a recommendation system that was beautiful, visual. And we determined the best way to do this was to do it on a mobile app. So what was interesting was, fortunately or unfortunately, we were about 80% done developing an iPhone app when I joined, which was designed with the previous thought process in mind, like we're going to be this search engine thing. And our investors really wanted us to launch with that as soon as possible. Well, the CEO went on vacation for 3 weeks, and we decided that we couldn't salvage it at all. Like we tried to shape it into this, to try to shape it into something that was similar to the insights that we were gleaning. We just couldn't do it. So we actually scrapped the entire app. The company had probably spent close to $500,000 or $1 million on it. And then I had to go in front of the board of directors and explain why we did this. But it was very clear to us that we were not just throwing something away. We had a very strong direction where we were going to go. There was nothing else in the market like it. We were best positioned to do it from a technology standpoint. And I told the board, hey, if this is not the #1 recipe app in the App Store within a month of its launch, then you can fire me. But the bottom line is we shouldn't be launching something that's not world-class, number one, and is not meeting users' needs. And we don't see translating what's on the website to a mobile app that we're going to get any engagement because we're just seeing people transactionally showing up and then leaving. That's not the type of relationship we want to have. We want to have an ongoing relationship. So,
what was the reaction of the board when you said that?
They were not happy, but I put my own.
I can imagine.
I put my own job on the line. I'm just at that level of confidence. But I had that level of confidence for two reasons. One is we were pretty confident on three reasons. Very confident on the product direction. We had a very clear vision of where we wanted to go. We knew how to build it. We had assembled a small team to do it, so that was good. Number two, there's an incredible amount of traffic going to Yumly.com, and a majority of it was on mobile web. So people were going to it on their phone. And so it was very easy at the time. I thought okay, let's just redirect those people to download the app. And so, if we have this amount of traffic, that's amazing. And I think number three is the bar was so low in the category. The incumbent players had been around for 10 years, and their business model was selling ads, and that's not and pasting as many ads on the page as possible. And we want to do something innovative and helpful. So I just thought we had a lot of opportunity to just kind of own the market. And so I led the product launch on iPhone. We did see after a couple of weeks we were ranked number one. Eventually, when you search for recipes, we would show up number one. We launched on iPad. We were the number one food app overall, Android. We were partners for Apple Watch launch. We did a bunch of stuff with Apple. And there was a point in which we went to fundraise for our Series B. Since I had done venture fundraising, the CEO promoted me to COO to help in that process. And after the successful fundraise, it was very clear that there was a lot of interest in the company. So we started a process of talking to third parties for acquisition. And so,
can I ask you a question here? So what year was that when you launched it and relaunched it in the app version? When was it? What year?
This was 2013 is when we launched. I mean, the company had been around since 2009, where they were it was really interesting. They essentially built the first full genome for food, which is essentially all the interlinkages between every single ingredient in the world, its nutrition and their relationships to each other. So you could, and by having this truth set, then we could apply learnings to recipe content, to people's profiles and preferences, and we could understand extremely complex concepts to essentially show people only the things they wanted. But in 2013 is when we really transitioned to being from a really great technology to a product.
Yeah, because I think it's very important to mention because it's almost a decade ago. So it's at that time, I'm sure that was a very innovative and in a very important move, strategic move. Otherwise, you probably would have been behind some other competitors if they would have done that instead of you doing so. So to me, that's also a great strategy of checking what's going on the market, the demand, and pivoting the direction. And obviously, as you said, and then you were thinking about what's next, and we can raise more funds, we can do more, and we can play that number one role in the App Store. So to me, that's definitely an example of a strategic move and successful strategy and change. That's why I wanted to confirm the timing, because it's important to know. Because right now, it would be a no-brainer. Let's do it. Let's go on an app and let's make it happen. But at the time, I think that was an important step. And when did you think about the acquisition? So you said you raised funds after, and when was that acquisition point when you started thinking, okay, maybe we can get acquired? And
I think there started to be interest after we closed our Series B, which was 26 or 20. I think it was end of 2015 or early 2016. That was both a good and a bad thing. So it's good to have interest in company. I mean, it's great to have any optionality you have as a company for a path forward when you're a startup is great, because every venture raise has a time limit, an expectation, which is usually 12 to 18 months of runway before you need to prove several things to get the next round of funding, which typically comes from another third party leading the new round, because someone has to set the value. And it doesn't make sense for internal or previous investors to set it. They have a conflict of interest to some extent. And we started to get interest, and the CEO was very interested. That was very interesting to him. So we actually started M&A mergers and acquisitions conversations with a few different parties. Now, one of the learnings that is really hard, I mean, it seems obvious when you hear it, but not when you're in it, is when people get into these conversations, they're extremely time consuming. And typically they're going through and trying to find, in a diligence process, the idea is to find areas of risk and opportunity. But risk is a big one because, with every company, there's the risk if the risk outweighs the opportunity, you shouldn't be doing that deal. And the amount of scrutiny can be extremely high. And so one of the things that companies can do is during those periods of time, they could be a lot more risk. The startups can be a lot more risk averse to essentially create less bad facts or less associated risk by not introducing uncertainty, which comes with new ideas. And a lot of times you're failing early and fast, but on the surface, it can look really bad. So we did that a bit at Yumly, where a lot of the things we're doing our pace of innovation slowed significantly through a good portion of our runway, basically the cash we had for our Series B. And so we got to a point where we had multiple parties interested, and very quickly had no parties interested. And we were, we were raising money for, let's say, 18 months, and we were 10 or 11 months into our spend, we had not shown proof points of how we took that money and increased the value of the company, which is very important to do. And so therefore, it was a few different things that led me to becoming the CEO. And these are definitely general learnings. One is this was a situation we were in, which is put us in a dire spot. Number two, the CEO, who is a co-founder and worked super hard for many, many years, had worked so hard that he didn't have the capacity from a health standpoint to continue to operate in the position, and saw that the upcoming part of the journey for the company was going to would burn him out. And so he resigned and asked me to take over as CEO, because I had done kind of these rough periods at startups before.
What was your reaction when he called? He's like, I want to step down and I want you to take that. What was your reaction at the time?
It was pretty shocking, because it was only, I think, a few days earlier where we were at the finish line with one of the potential acquirers. And so to go from, and that's just the nature of this stuff, is to go from, basically an incredible spot for a company to, oh no, like, what are we going to do? That is, that's just a big part of in startup world. So I was surprised, but not completely surprised. And I was concerned that we may not have all the ingredients to be able to pull this off. And so I needed to do my own assessment of where things were. Since I was so focused on certain aspects of the business, I needed to take a deeper look financially where we were spending money, and figure out how do we turn the remaining months into many more months, so we could prove to the world that our previous raise, which was, close to $15 million, was translated into a lot of value growth. And so part of that was making a deal with our existing board members to add more funds, like give us a loan to essentially extend the runway, and which they promised. And so the first order of business, unfortunately, was to do layoffs. We actually ran through scenarios. I remember the board said to me, we'll give you 90 days to figure this out. And my response was, we don't have 90 days. We have to figure this out in 2 weeks. And we literally sat in a room, the CFO, myself, and the other co-founder, who's our CTO. And between the CFO and myself, we took turns crying and sometimes laying on the floor, like, what are we going to do? Like this, we don't see any way through this. So we eventually came up with a few scenarios that included a loan from our existing investors, very quickly laying off a third of the company, which was incredibly challenging because one of the things we really prided ourselves on was, before everyone was talking about it at great length, we were probably one of the most balanced tech companies from a male-female ratio and a diversity standpoint. And it just so happened in this scenario that a majority of the people that were being laid off were women. It was not because of had anything to do with gender. It just was the specific positions. Yeah. So the optics were just generally really bad. It was extremely surprising to the team because the team thought we were on an amazing trajectory and had really no time to adjust. And so we had to not only, take a sharp pivot for the company to reduce our cash spend, but also to figure out how to build trust again, because it's you break trust when.
Of course, and it's a very hard decision to make. I actually interviewed the CEO of a healthcare and medical device startup just a couple of days ago, and we had this discussion how hard it is to learn to make those hard decisions and how to actually let someone go, someone who bought into that idea, bought into that team and worked for that team. How do you explain to them? But how did you cope with this? Because especially we had such a short time to do so. What was your maybe lesson learned from that experience and something to share with people who might be in that situation? So what is it that you learned from that experience?
Well, there's a lot of learnings. I think the thing that these things are never, layoffs are not easy ever. And there's a lot of research done on how to do it in the best way possible, down to which day, how you deliver it. It's, typically a Tuesday. Like there's all sorts of things and reasons why. But the thing that made it work so well, as well as it could have gone, was that we were as very transparent with the team as to what was going on. I personally delivered the message to each person that was leaving. And I think them also seeing that we had no other path forward for the company. And we even considered, and this was made clear, where even myself, our CFO, our CTO, we even had scenarios where we were eliminated. And we had to just come up with the best scenario for the company to move forward. And I think us being real and more personal and me doing it personally, I would say I think it was 90% of the people at the end of the conversation thanked me and gave me a hug. And it was, there was times where I was like, there were hugging and crying happening because, but they knew that, and you also, in a leadership role, you have to take responsibility for what's happening. And they knew to some extent, this wasn't really my fault, but I had to implement something as quickly as possible. So a lot of those people remained friends of the company. But the additional learning was, each time you do a layoff, how you do it, it's going to erode trust in some respects. How you do it is how, can affect how much you erode trust, and you could potentially use it as a means to help reset things. So we turned the company from being fairly opaque and not transparent with our team. And we put things in place to try to solidify trust and rebuild trust. So I said every Friday we have an all hands meeting, we will have an unfiltered Q&A session, and I will do my best to answer any question you could throw at me. There's certain questions I can't answer because they're, they may be HR, they may be personal people information that I can't share, but I'm going to try to overshare. And what we found was, even during a very dire period, if people just hear the truth, it's generally better than what they're imagining in their mind. And if you tell them the truth, you try to be as transparent as possible and real, and then also talk about the things you're doing to try to mitigate the very challenging things ahead. and it's amazing. Our retention was incredible during that period of time, even though arguably people's jobs were like potentially only a few months of certainty. So that was a lot of learnings from that. I think there was a continued, I think these things can splinter a team or they can bring people together. And we try to put things in place to say this is like an opportunity for us to really work together, put any differences aside, because at the end of the day, we're all in the same boat. So politics, all the stuff, any personal things you have with others, like let's just defer that, indefinitely, because we have a lot to get done. And let's figure out also what not to do. Like, what are the things we're not going to work on? Because you have less people, not try to sign up for more things. Like, what can we do that shows wins fast? And also, because wins, that's a confidence builder, a trust builder as well, in like kind of measurable ways. And also celebrating small wins too. Just anything that can go right was a big part of this.
Yeah. And do you think that building transparency and building the trust is one of the key features of an effective leadership? Would you agree with that? Do you think being transparent with your team, being honest with your team is part of it?
So that is my style. I don't think there is necessarily, every company has, probably a right fit for them, the amount of transparency. So you look at a company like Apple, it's not transparent at all. Like they purposefully break things up. Somehow it works for them. They're maybe the most successful company in the world.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of the transparency actually almost backfired because we were sharing some information related to the fact that we were being acquired. And some of that information leaked to a competitor who happened to put an offer for the company, a fake bogus offer to the company to distract our investors the same day our term sheet was due from someone who is actually a legitimate a potential acquirer. And that would not have happened if I was not as transparent. So that me being transparent may have actually destroyed the company. So there are time and place. There's probably to a degree. And so I think there's nuance to it. I don't think it's like one or the other. But I think generally what I've found is if people have the information, they can make smarter decisions and they're less fearful because it's known versus an unknown. So I think if you think about it that way versus like sharing everything, because, arguably maybe I overshared at certain times, but what I wanted to do was overshare. So at some point people would kind of tune me out and say, okay, I just trust that they're figuring this out. And like I know that I know they have my back. Like I know they're thinking in my best interest. So it's a spectrum. And I think it just depends on the company and the situation and even the stage of the company too.
Yeah. But from that experience and experience going through acquisition, all those challenges you just mentioned, what would you say are key things to expect from the process of being either going for a potential acquisition, but being acquired by someone else? So you're a company and you have a prospect of being acquired. So what are the few things you could share with me that you would say, pay attention to? Maybe it's a legal component that you need to be aware of, or maybe it's a component, like you said, maybe less sharing with the team and maybe having more discussion behind a closed door. So what is it that you took away from your experience?
Well, number one, as a startup, if you have like kind of a metaphorical equivalent, there's a lot of duct tape holding things together. And so that has to, a lot of that has to be reconciled and cleaned up. So yes, as a startup, you want to move fast, you want to be able to do things, but it's, just being able to just, kind of keep track of things and have some level of housekeeping around things like contracts. If you have any systems, like having those master service agreements in a place that look good, just all that stuff, every single thing will be looked at and scrutinized. Number two, if it's a smart acquirer, they're going to purposefully overreact to things to make you feel as though, like, oh, well, this is a really big deal. But a lot of that is posturing because, they effectively want it to appear like, that there's a lot of risk associated with things. So
power play.
I think so. Number three, ideally, you have more than one party at the table. That puts you in a dramatically better situation. We were not in that position all the time. Same is true kind of generally. That was a bit challenging. Let's see. I think the other thing is, as much as you want to like insulate the team, we found that it can be incredibly invasive and time consuming for key people in the company who have to participate in conversations, in long sessions with attorneys. And to some extent, this is something, depending on the potential acquirer, they may have good intent. But in some cases, you also have to think about, do they have good intent? Or are they actually really, as a small company, draining our resources, slowing our process, essentially hurting us to effectively compete with us or to prevent us from being a threat? Because in many cases, paying a bunch of lawyers to ask unlimited amounts of questions is maybe less expensive than buying the company, number one, or having you as a competitor. So trying to set expectations collectively for what are the different stages in this process, how long are they going to take, and trying to limit that, because the diligence list could go on forever, and to basically try to create these deadlines, which everyone's working towards, so those expectations are set ahead of time, is really important. I think the other thing that I experienced was, if the company's in a great spot, let's say you're, at the time, a company that was being acquired very recently prior to Yumli was a company, Jet.com. They were acquired by Walmart for several $billions. That was a happy acquisition. So we shared attorneys with that acquisition. It took a couple, it was a very short acquisition, didn't take a lot of time. All the investors were happy, everyone was going to be making money. So everyone wanted this thing to go through. With Yumli, we had a lot of various members of our board and our investors that had competing and different motivations, which made it incredibly challenging. And some of that is things you could deal with earlier on. But we had strategic investors who were potentially incentivized for us to almost fail so they could acquire us very inexpensively. We had regular, more typical venture capitalists who wanted us to be acquired and just wanted to be able to exit properly.
That's a very common thing too, when they are trying to tell you, yes, do so, because we want to get our money back, right?
Yeah.
So that's a very common scenario.
They were actually the most aligned with the company because it can vary. Then the last one we had early investors who were angel investors who thought, well, this company should be worth billions of dollars. The deal that's on the table is not good enough. We don't want to approve it. And we think, so they're on one hand saying, we're not excited about it, but they also don't have the funds to back it up to allow optionality or other scenarios. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing was we had, the founders of the company, or the founder and previous CEO had his own personal motivations, and those all those conflicted across our entire board. And so because the board could not work, we were not aligned. And then myself, my goal was to create some path forward for the company. It was my job it was my responsibility as a CEO to work with what I had. And so that was incredibly challenging. And actually in this particular scenario, working through our internal challenges at Yumli and our board was more complicated and difficult than working with third parties. In other cases, that can be dramatically different. And then the last learning that was for me personally was I think there's a book called this, but there's like your body keeps score, and after, it's like, oh, well, an acquisition's amazing. And the story of how, like, the actual date when the thing closed, happened to be at the Kentucky Derby in the infield in like a men's bathroom and pouring rain. And it like sounds like someone like, oh, it's such a cool story. But within a couple months, like, I was so burnt out that I got shingles, which typically, like, someone in their 30s, like, doesn't get shingles. That's typically for someone much older. And then Christmas Eve of the same year, I got appendicitis, all from just the amount of stress and strain on, physically that was translated, like, because I was absorbing this. I had to stay as the CEO of a company that's about to be acquired. You're dealing with hundreds of different constituencies. And if you think about it like a hub of a wheel, your job is to keep it as steady as possible. So you're absorbing all of that, and you can't overreact, or you have to like overreact in a deliberate way, like deliberately overreact at specific things and hold it in for others. And so I think a lot of that, I didn't have the luxury of having any time to find, like, to let that out. And so I absorbed that personally and physically, and it burnt me out. Even though I stayed with the company for 4 years afterwards, the first year I was just hand waving because I was not myself. I was essentially, just kind of going through the motions as we figured out how we were going to work with this company, because I was so burnt out, and I was not. It was difficult. So there's some people they're meant for it. They go into like private equity, and they're involved in these types of things. And I know I'm very well attuned to helping take very dire startup situations and getting them to a good spot, but it's just it's just so taxing. And also what's interesting is people think, oh, wow, so not only did we get acquired, so the way I equate it is kind of like there's that movie Sully where they landed a plane on the Hudson River and everyone survived. It was like that, but we also took off, because not only did we get acquired, everyone got their money back from the investors, but I structured a special deal for the current employees who stuck around, even independent of what their stock was worth, anything, to get a bonus from, to the day of the acquisition, essentially the day of the acquisition, to recognize them for sticking around. So it was so nice to deliver that to each person. And, you would think like, oh, well, you got this through. And our attorneys, we had some of the best attorneys. They said this was like a less than 1% chance of going through. It was like literally willed to happen. But the thing that's probably surprising to people is I didn't feel an ounce of sense of accomplishment. I just felt like it was like a feeling of like, we didn't die. I didn't die. The company didn't die. People have their jobs. It was just like we survived a potential attack, and which is frustrating, because you'd think like, oh, that must have been like this amazing feeling. And I would sit across the table from someone who was giving them a bonus that potentially could help change their life, and feeling like observing it and trying to feel their level of excitement, and not.
But you couldn't.
And so it took until like a holiday party and giving like the speech to the team where I felt like maybe 5% of what I should have felt. So like it sounds glamorous, and you have the press release and it sounds really amazing. And for some, maybe it is, but maybe in this situation, it was so painful that it just never really felt that. And I would say through all the acquisitions, I've always left feeling just like exhausted and like just alive. Like I'm glad we're alive, whoever we is. Yeah.
What a story. I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's important for people to hear this and the reality of it. And of course, I wanted to ask you about your employees, because we spoke about it before, and I wanted to touch on it. I know that you did negotiate that deal. So everyone who stick with the company, they could have gotten their positions and potentially more. So I think, to me, that's also a sign of a very Well, inspirational leadership style, in my opinion, because I think that's what makes
Thank
you
you.
an effective leader, when you promise something to people and you're able to deliver it. And I cannot even imagine the level of stress you had to go through, because you were so close to lose that opportunity to deliver on your promises, right? So that's why we probably didn't feel as happy as you should have,
Well,
or maybe people would just think.
Yeah, so that structure was atypical. Typically, we called it it's called a management carve out, and they give it to the people. They basically incentivize people to stay by dangling this potential bonus, additional bonus for closing the deal, because there's so much work that goes into it. So it typically goes to the CEO, maybe the CFO, and then maybe a few other people at most who are involved in getting the deal over the finish line. And then everyone else, they're still hoping their stock's worth something. We did something really unique where instead of having it just be distributed myself and the CFO, the two people who were working on the deal, we had it distributed to the entire, we structured it so the entire team would get a portion of it. And that went against, it actually angered some people that were even investors, because they're like, wait a second, why is, this employee A getting all this, and my response to them was, this employee A had been here for 8 years, is an engineer, had built these systems, and has never once complained. They're sticking with it. And without them, we wouldn't be able to survive. And so I'm not going to just try to satiate the demands of the loudest voice. It just needs to go to people who I'm hoping that in spirit, we can give it to the people who deserve it in this particular situation. And so we were able to do that. And it was something I still to date, I'm very proud that it was a decision we made versus just taking it all for myself or the CFO. I just think it's just like, to be able to do the right thing when no one's looking, I think is a really nice, and the team doesn't know, like I never explained this to them, that this was like some special thing that no one gets. We just said, hey, for doing great work, we did this, we negotiated. So on day 0 of your new employment, or day 1, you're getting this thing. They just, it's not about recognition or anything like that. Just to do the right thing. And
no, it's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. Again, I think it's very unique when people can be so transparent and you can share your story with so many details. And I think people should know, especially people who are getting into this, or they're thinking about starting a company, maybe they're running a company. And like I said, I'm interviewing people who've started companies and they are planning on I don't know, hopefully exit successfully in a happy acquisition, like you said, but sometimes acquisitions can be unhappy and it's important to be prepared. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
I also want to ask you, considering the place where you're at and your specialty, that's in your role in the tech sector and being in this sector for quite some time now, I'm curious to know if you were maybe watching some interesting companies in the Bay Area that are kind of emerging right now, because tech sector specifically has been in a bit of a troublesome situation for the last little bit. So I'm curious to know what's your maybe prediction for the next, let's say, couple of years, what's going to happen. And also maybe you can tell me if you're watching any interesting startups, interesting companies that are appearing in the Bay Area that you would just maybe share with me. And take a look.
Yeah, of course. So I would say it's more just general areas of interest, because there's a lot of companies popping up and disappearing, and there's a lot of nascent things happening, or really interesting things that are happening. And I think the area that really interests me, both personally and is actually becoming more of a thing now, is people, you probably see all these people are doing all these, the filters now where people are doing their own portraits, getting 200 portraits from apps like Lensa, is the intersection of creativity and artificial intelligence is, I think, an emerging and will probably be one of the areas that shifts the most over the next 5 years. And so that has started. There's actually a book called The Artist and the Machine, which is a great book where they've talked about a lot of the early people who are working with like Deep Dream and AI powered art. I actually use machine learning and with my own art as well. I collaborate with an AI version of my own artistic brain to do oil paintings. But I think that's going to be proliferated beyond art. We're seeing it, and some of the art stuff that's happening now is mind blowing. You can give a text prompt to something like, there's a company called Midjourney.
Yes.
And so Midjourney, there's a bunch of these. I think that one happens to be doing some of the best work, but I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, this is going to be the winner, because I think it's so early and this stuff is changing so fast. There could be a new company tomorrow that's doing it, what Midjourney is doing, but with video, or what Midjourney is doing with video. And it also creates a musical score in a particular style. And also you could hear voice or someone singing prose. And so I think where we're going to see a lot of change is in these creative fields. And the ones that I think are most interesting will be music, especially electronic music, because there's a lot of structure to it and pattern. To be able to have artificial intelligence create like house music or tech. I mean, some of the stuff's ripe for being able to do this, like tech house. Then starting to carry over, we've done, like people can fully, machine learning and like AI can learn people's voices. So I imagine this idea where an individual can sing, have a terrible voice, it translate that into music that's generated or the score that's created by AI. And then you can say, well, I want my voice to be 20% Miles Davis, 30% this person, and, the rest Adele. And it would like merge them all together. And then having, also the potentially writing the actual lyrics to the music. Mm-hmm. So music, I think that's going to be one that can be completely disrupted. And I think it will change the way laws are written, because, the likeness of someone's voice, how do you determine that? Like if it's 90% Beyonce and 10% Madonna and someone launches that, is that infringement on anyone's rights in its current form? So to me, that's a really interesting area. I don't know if it's going to be like the next $1 billion. I mean, it's obviously, it'll be very disruptive. But I just think it's going to change dramatically. That's just one area, so creativity and AI intersection.
And you kind of pointed out something that I'm also thinking when it comes to programs like Midjourney and the music, the passion that we both share, electronic music. I also think it will create lots of, debate, I would imagine. Debate. Who is that person who creates that music? Is it a person? Is it a computer? And copyright, like who owns the copyright? Who owns the creative part of it? Because when technically anyone can put 90%, like algorithm, they use the algorithm, put the 30% Beyonce, 30% Madonna, and 30% of, Michael Jackson into one voice. But who owns that? Is it an art? Is it a creative process, or just an algorithm? So it raises a very interesting, to me, like it's a debate. And I think we will hear more and more conversations, and especially artists. And for you, for example, like you said, you are an artist and you do paint, and you're already incorporating the AI into your art. But how far can you go before it becomes less of you and more of a AI?
Yeah, and I actually
is there a limit?
So for me, my process was I loaded in my corpus of work, all of it into a model that then I can draw something and it will spit out what it would guess how I'd paint it, for example, and it would usually spits out hundreds of these. I layer them and in Photoshop and I cut away at them. So, and then I will eventually, draw and paint on the iPad and then figure out what my composition is and then paint it in oils. And the entire process is probably 80 to 90% is my creativity. And then I would say the last 20% is happy accidents made by somewhat crappy AI. But now seeing some of these services come out and seeing the quality of the work, to some extent, it's very discouraging as an artist, because it is so far beyond but the portraits that it can create are now what I would say better than my skill level. They can't maybe render in my style, but all they need to do is learn my style and they could do it better than me. And so it is discouraging. So I think it's, unfortunately, it will be a race to who can publish stuff as fast as possible. One of the people that was in this book, The Artist and the Machine, he published over 10,000 books using AI, writing the books on Amazon. And he did it all with AI, and he put his, it's his name, and so people can, to some extent, say, well, if art is creating your own constraints by which you put something out that is like kind of like a creative capsule, and you're creating those same creative constraints, but you're letting a machine do it, then is it yours? And it's really interesting. There's now prompt artists they're experts now at how to feed like language into like a sentence or a paragraph into Midjourney to spit out the best result. Like, are they artists or are they writers? Or, is that a form of art? And is the end result something that can be, right? That's like a whole different.
I know that's something we're getting into, because to me, it is a creative process. And I think we can't take it away from those people, because they are the ones who are making sure they put the right words in, and they are getting what they are potentially have in mind in using the Midjourney or any other platform as a tool, which I understand. And similarly, using a brush as a tool, you paint. However, if before your level of art was also potentially valued maybe in sort of a price or what people can see in it. So can you put a value in something like that? This value change. If it becomes more and more accessible to anyone to do so, does it become more unique or less unique? So I think all of those questions we will see and we will hear. Yeah. And I don't know. I don't have answers, but it's a very interesting field. And the music production is well, like you said, like you touched on, because that's something that I and you both of us are getting into. It's just, where's that line? Where is it, like me or you, or can we produce, 100 tracks per day now? So
because effectively, music is one of the most, probably the most structured art form. And there is tons of libraries of all this music. So a machine could either listen to it and hear the audio, or it can look at MIDI files, basically the digital translation, see patterns, and then you could apply other facts like, oh, this piece is in this style, or this piece happened to be the #1 chart seller, and it can find patterns that we can't find. And theoretically, you could say, okay, well, these were all the top songs of the 1970s. Now spit out a tune with those instruments and these voices. Netflix did this when they did House of Cards. They just did the research to figure out like, what's the right combination of actors and writers and script line and storyline to create kind of the perfect show. And that was done manually with people, but computers can see patterns and things and actually could spit out the end result that humans can't even see. And that's what's kind of amazing about AI, and also very scary. But theoretically, and my guess is some of the top hits, even of today, are secretly being created by computers, and we don't know it. No one knows it yet. And it's
the famous story of Spotify, right? With the Spotify, when they uncovered that AI was creating a big percentage of the tracks that they were promoting. So there was a big scandal around that subject a few years ago when it was released that it was not even created by legitimate artists. And it kind of shook the industry and put that question mark next to who owns that track, who creates that music, and who, I guess, owns the rights to it. So it's a big question, the future. Yeah.
And what I'm hoping is it doesn't just commodify the creative world, because if it's so easy to get 200 amazing portraits of yourself, for an illustrator who that's their job, I don't know where they go. Like, I don't know what they do. And so I know it's a whole topic, a whole separate topic.
I think it's another podcast just around that subject, I think. But I guess what I wanted to ask you in relations to this topic is being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, running a business, or being head of the design group and team at your job. How do you find time to create and write the music or play music and paint your paintings. And I would like to know how that part of your life feeds back into your business side, because that's something that I'm exploring myself. And I find that what helps me to balance my energy in a way. But for you, considering you do both the painting and the music, and I'm curious, how do you find time and how do you feed back that energy? What's your recipe?
So for me, art is when I'm going through kind of a life transition period is when I'm most creative. So this year, I would say last year I did enough paintings to have a show. Anna attended, which was awesome. I know that, appreciate you attending. And that was, I had it in me. This year I haven't done as much, but I think for me, I've found that, people find different ways, to essentially meditate. And for me, and I think Anna, probably speaking for you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, doing DJing is a somewhat meditative activity because you have to be in the moment. You're feeling the music. It is, it actually incorporates both parts of your brain. It's both the left and right brain. And depending on how you DJ, we DJ very differently the way we approach it. For me, it's very meditative. So I look at it as a means to just get out of my head. And for me, my constraint is I always have to live stream it, so I can't mess up. It just forces me to make creative decisions to keep it going. So for me, it's like when I really need that. And so I found, like, essentially as an entrepreneur, one of the things that was why I have burnt out multiple times is I didn't have enough of these activities to counterbalance the intensity of the work. And so I spent years trying to accumulate as many of these as possible, and they don't all work all the time. So I essentially cycle through them. One is DJing, another one is painting, another one is Brazilian jiu-jitsu, weight training, going for walks, laser tag. I've tried to accumulate as many as I can, and now powerlifting is a new one, because if one is not enough, it's like having an arsenal of different things to just get back to being centered. For me, I tried meditating. I found it made me more stressed, or yoga. I couldn't do it. It made me more stressed. But so I would kind of measure how do I feel after this? And so these activities at different times for me, so they serve in that purpose. And in some cases, I would set a goal related to each of these, but generally speaking, they're more just to keep me sane and balanced. And I do think the way it translates back into work is, some of our jobs put us in, depending on what type of job people have, they may be kind of put into a silo. And it may, unfortunately atrophy some creative aspect of their being. And if you come home feeling unfulfilled in a particular way, listen to that and see if there's a way you can supplement. And you don't necessarily have to have some financial goal or any end goal in mind other than, like, if it feeds your soul. Like, do you feel like your soul is fed, or do you feel more relaxed? You feel more centered or healthy? Then great. Like, that's great. It could be just for you, and it could be the most obscure thing that just makes you happy. To me, I just spent a lot of time doing that. And some of them were complete failures. Like, yoga was terrible for me. Whereas, doing mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu were surprisingly good, but I can only do them sometimes because it's very stressful on you can't just be, rolling with like professional fighters all the time. And, it's just taxing on your body. So it's like a constant calibration, but that's why. So I think also coming back to work and after doing a painting, the way I look at it is like, all these things all creative processes are a set. There's a set of limits. Either it's imposed upon you by a market or the world or your business, or you're creating it for yourself as an artist. Like, if you're a house music musician, you're saying, okay, here's my, set of instruments. This is the speed. This is typically how it's structured. I want to create this kind of feeling. These are some music principles and music theory I can apply. And then here's my creative spin on it. Like, that's all still a set of limits that you're applying and you work. It's the power of what you do within it is a creative problem solving process. So by doing it, I don't have the proof to do it. I'm sure there's proof that shows that it forms different linkages in your brain to allow you to think in different ways. And then you can potentially apply something that seems very unrelated to a completely different, it could be a work problem. I mean, you could be in brain surgery and say, wow, actually, this is a way I'm thinking about this. And I was inspired by something that was in my music. And I actually know a lot of doctors that are artists, that are illustrated. They're generally really illustrative, and they can actually draw what they're doing. And that's,
No, I agree. I think it also feeds that three-dimensional way of seeing what they see during the surgery. So I heard that as well. Awesome. Well, thank you. I think it was great and great perspective. I have one last question for you. That's how I like to finish my interviews and my conversations, I guess. It's about travel. So as you know, I love traveling. I think traveling is one of those things that it feeds my soul. And I also think it's one of the best ways, to be honest, to grow and develop yourself and challenge yourself and discover new things for yourself. So my question is, where would you go next? What would be your next travel destination and why?
So probably to be inspired or just to go to an inspiring place. I've never been to Japan. And as a product and a design oriented person, one of the things I really appreciate, and I see this with I have a good friend who's a Japanese designer, and is when they do stuff, like they go all the way, like it's extreme. And they'll over design things, and there's like playfulness and humor. And I would just want to go and just be immersed in that environment and to be able to see it. Like I've experienced like kind of European design and been in kind of the European setting and seen a lot of that type of, but to me, that would be really, really fun I would want to both experience the amazing things that they create. And that's, I think also the creative space in general as well, like just to be able to experience a concert or a show or go to a dance club or watch a movie or anything like that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And also there's amazing places to visit too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That was a wonderful interview. I really appreciate your
thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
I'm honored to be on it. So thanks for having me.